also surrendered the jobs of many of your backbench MPs to the next general election to reform.
Name wasn't on this letter. What are your thoughts in regard to its sentiments, Jonathan?
I agree with them.
You agree with them? Are you going to rebel?
I do. I'll be very clear. When these cuts were announced, I spoke locally with my party and said I couldn't envisage myself voting for those cuts. I think we've got to be, and I don't intend to, I should say, very clear.
Britain just witnessed a political earthquake. What was once unthinkable has now become reality. Labour has lost its grip, and Keir Starmer is at the centre of the collapse. It started in Runcorn and Helsby, where Reform UK pulled off a stunning upset, seizing a long-time Labour stronghold by just 25 votes, the narrowest win in British by-election history. Didn't just flip a seat, it cracked open a system.
Just to be clear, Jonathan, I haven't heard this before. You're saying that you're going to vote against the government. Is that the first time that you will have rebelled?
Yes. And I think it's really important to be clear about this. So much of what is in that green paper is absolutely right. We have to reduce the benefit bill in this country. We have to get people back into work. Work is absolutely the right place for people to be. And I think we've gone through a generation where the benefit bill has skyrocketed. But cutting support for disabled people doesn't solve that problem. That is about balancing the books. That's about making the numbers stack up for fiscal rules and everything else. I have spoken to countless people in Hartlepool, people who actually are in work but rely on PIP in order to support them to do it, who are going to lose under this system.
Inside Westminster, shock turned to chaos. Starmer, already under fire for drifting away from working-class roots, now faced open rebellion. Disillusioned MPs began defecting to Reform UK, fed up with a party they say has abandoned the very people it claimed to fight for. The defections weren't symbolic, they were the first signs of a mass exodus. Felled by fury over welfare cuts, broken promises and years of political doublespeak, Labour's foundation is beginning to crumble. What used to be loyal voters now feel betrayed, and what used to be fringe politics is becoming mainstream. The cracks are widening, and for the first time in decades, a serious third-party threat is rising. Starmer's crisis isn't isolated. It's the beginning of a reckoning.
Work, and that's also a massive problem that we have to solve. But simply piling on pain to those in desperate need is not a way to solve anything. The impact assessment released by this government said that it would push 250,000 people into poverty, including 50,000 children. I did not get into politics to do that. So absolutely the sentiment of that green paper about getting people back into work is right, getting people off benefits is right, but simply cutting support for people who are disabled is not the way to achieve it. I would argue it probably makes it less likely that some of those people will get into work.
Reform UK, once dismissed as a protest group, has become a magnet for voters who feel shut out by both Labour and the Conservatives. With each by-election win, with every televised soundbite from Nigel Farage, they're pulling in people across the spectrum. Former Labour loyalists, disillusioned Tories, and those in the political middle who've had enough. The party's message is blunt, sometimes abrasive, but it feels honest. That rawness is breaking through where polished manifestos fail. It's not just about policy, it's about being heard. Reform UK speaks the language of frustration, and in an era where trust in politicians is at rock bottom, that authenticity matters more than ever. Inside Labour, the fallout has been brutal. MPs are defecting, backbenchers are plotting, and party veterans are openly questioning Starmer's leadership. The rebellion is no longer a quiet grumble, it's a roar. Every defection to Reform UK adds fuel to the fire, painting a picture of a Labour Party in freefall.
So just to be clear, Jonathan Brash, Labour MP for Hartlepool, you're saying this morning for the first time that you're going to vote against the government on these disability cuts. What is your message to Keir Starmer on this, and what presumably your whip and the person who deals with party discipline within Labour is going to give you a ring about this? You're presumably going to have very similar sentiments to what you've just said to me a moment ago.
Yeah, look, my view is that I would urge the government to rethink, to have a look at this again.
Do you think they will?
I sincerely hope they will. One of the things that frustrates me enormously sometimes about politics is that reassessing your position, changing your position is seen as a sign of weakness. It's not. It's a sign of strength. Looking again, change circumstances, to change position, thinking about what you're doing and whether it's the right course of action and potentially correcting that course of action is a sign of strength. Yes, you'll get political commentators who'll scream U-turn, but who cares? This is about doing the right thing. And there are people right now in my constituency and constituencies right across this country that are worried, they're scared, they're anxious, and they're potentially going to be pushed into poverty by these specific changes around personal independence payments. I think we should rethink that. But I reiterate the overall aim of the government and the Green Paper to get people back.
For millions, it's no longer about left or right, it's about who's actually listening. And Reform UK is winning that battle. Behind closed doors, the pressure finally broke Keir Starmer. As MPs defected and party unity disintegrated, he made the only move left. He called a snap general election. But this wasn't strategy, it was survival. With his authority in shreds and whispers of a leadership challenge growing louder, Starmer pulled the trigger in hopes of resetting the board before it collapsed completely. The decision sent Parliament into freefall. Starmer had once positioned himself as the adult in the room, the steady hand after years of Tory chaos. But now, he looked like a man trapped by his own party, scrambling to regain control. His snap election announcement wasn't bold, it was desperate. The consequences came fast. Poll numbers dipped further. Party infighting spilled into public view. Voters, already frustrated by Labour's policy flip-flops and muted leadership, saw the election not as a fresh start, but as a last-ditch gamble by a man on the ropes. And all the while, Reform UK kept climbing. The snap election wasn't just the beginning of a campaign. It was the clearest signal yet that the old guard is crumbling, and Britain's political future is up for grabs. Labour's crisis isn't unfolding in isolation. The Conservatives are bleeding just as badly. In recent local elections, they lost over 600 seats and control of 13 councils, a collapse that would have made headlines on its own if not for Labour's implosion. Kemi Badenoch is now clinging to control of a fractured party as internal divisions and mounting public anger continue to build.
Probably the first time you've rebelled or threatened to rebel. Do you regret voting for the winter fuel allowance cut? Should you have rebelled on that?
It's a complicated one because I've said to you before, Peter, I absolutely agree with the principle of means testing. There's no way, for instance, my parents who are perfectly well off should be receiving a state handout with their heating bills. But as I've always said, I thought the threshold was too low. If I'm honest with you, maybe I can probably put my hand on my heart and say that maybe I shouldn't have voted for it at the time. It's something I think about most days, to be perfectly honest. What I said at the time when I voted for it, is that I thought the government needed to look very closely at the threshold and raise it significantly. It's what I believed then, it's still what I believe now.
What's happening in Westminster isn't ordinary political turbulence. It's a full-blown system failure. The traditional two-party dominance is no longer holding. Voters are fed up with inflation that keeps rising, wages that barely budge, and services like the NHS stretched beyond breaking point. Crime is up, home ownership feels impossible, and public faith in government has evaporated. Both Labour and the Tories keep offering reheated promises. Reform UK, on the other hand, is offering something different. Not necessarily better, but different enough to feel refreshing, and that's proving powerful. Whose isn't just about by-elections or polling data, it's about a country nearing a tipping point. The two parties that once commanded near total loyalty are watching that loyalty vanish, and Reform UK is stepping into the void with momentum they never expected to hold. Keir Starmer tried to be everything to everyone, and in the process became nothing to anyone. His strategy to broaden Labour's appeal blurred the party's identity. Policies shifted, stances softened, and promises blurred into platitudes. For a while, it seemed to work. But now, that balancing act has collapsed. As the country's frustrations mount, Starmer looks increasingly detached. He once positioned himself as the grown-up in the room. But today, even his own MPs are questioning what he stands for. Some call him indecisive. Others say he's just out of touch. But the result is the same. Labour voters no longer recognised the party they once trusted. Defections to Reform UK didn't come out of nowhere. They followed months of Labour alienating its base with tone-deaf messaging, policy U-turns, and an unwillingness to confront hard truths. Even within the party, support for Starmer is cracking under pressure. The snap election wasn't an act of bold leadership, it was a political SOS, and it came too late to fix the fundamental issue. Starmer doesn't just lack momentum, he lacks a mission.
Can you explain to our listeners why a family that has an income in excess of £200,000 a year needs to have clothes or glasses bought for them?
No. No, I can't.
What's it? No, and I think that is where
Labour's unravelling didn't stop with defections or election missteps. One of the most damaging blows came from inside its own ranks, during a radio panel, no less. Labour MP Lucy Powell sparks outrage when she appeared to downplay a Channel 4 documentary exposing abuse by grooming gang. This comment triggered immediate backlash, not just from political opponents, but from ordinary voters across the spectrum. It wasn't just what she said, it was the timing. Reform UK was gaining momentum precisely because voters felt mainstream parties weren't addressing difficult issues. Then Powell, on national radio, seemed to confirm that suspicion. For many, it looked like Labour was brushing off a deeply painful subject to protect its image. Powell eventually apologised, claiming her comments were aimed at political opportunism, not the victims. But the damage was done. The public saw it as another moment where Labour chose optics over empathy. The fallout deepened Labour's trust deficit. People were already sceptical of the party's commitment to justice on sensitive matters. Now they were furious. Instead of offering clarity or reassurance, Labour handed Reform UK more fuel, and they wasted no time using it. Lucy Powell's apology might have been swift, but the outrage was louder. Critics said her remarks trivialised child sexual exploitation and discouraged honest public debate. What made it worse was how slow Labour leadership was to respond. When asked if Keir Starmer agreed with Powell's framing, his spokesperson gave a vague, cautious reply, more focused on avoiding controversy than addressing it head-on. That ambiguity didn't just frustrate voters, it infuriated them. It reinforced the belief that Labour is more interested in controlling narratives than confronting uncomfortable truths. The issue wasn't just Powell's words, it was the party's apparent reluctance to fully acknowledge the pain behind them. Meanwhile, voices outside the party demanded more. Conservative co-chair Nigel Hoddleston accused Labour of downplaying the scandal to protect councils under their control. He pushed for a full statutory public inquiry, calling it a moral obligation, not a political stunt. Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp echoed those demands, saying justice must come before party image. Even survivors' families stepped forward. Marlon West, whose daughter's story was featured in the Channel 4 documentary, said he didn't want apologies, he wanted action. And like many across Britain, he wasn't sure Labour was willing to deliver it. This isn't just Labour's problem anymore, it's a sign that the entire political system is nearing collapse. The grooming gang scandal, the by-election upsets, the wave of defections, they all point to a growing divide between the political elite and the public they claim to serve. Voters aren't just angry, they're done waiting, and the rise of Reform UK shows they're willing to burn the old playbook. What started as quiet frustration has turned into a national revolt. Reform's rise isn't about polished campaigns or clever slogans, it's about raw emotion. Disbelief that no matter who's in charge, nothing seems to change. Communities have watched wages stagnate, services break down, and politicians point fingers while doing nothing. That anger has found a home now. Britain faces a snap election in the middle of political chaos. Labour is fractured. The Conservatives are collapsing, Reform UK is surging, and voters are no longer choosing the lesser evil. It wasn't just what she said, it was the timing. Reform UK was gaining momentum precisely because voters felt mainstream parties weren't addressing difficult issues. They're demanding something entirely new. This election won't just decide who governs, it may decide what British politics looks like for the next generation. And as the dust settles, one thing is certain. What once seemed impossible is already happening. Britain's political landscape is cracking wide open, and this is just the beginning. If you want more unfiltered coverage like this, hit subscribe and tap the bell. Drop your thoughts below. Is Reform UK the future or just another protest vote? Thanks for watching.